West Wind's Passage. It is curious how the land comes up from the sea after a passage of many days across open water, a passage the progress of which is measured until then only upon a chart with penciled lines calculated from much observation of the sun and other heavenly bodies, and the working of involved trigonometrical formulae simplified by tables. Slowly the line across the chart heads towards the darkened landmass in one corner, and for a long time there is nothing but the lengthening lines and water, 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 which might always be the same, in the same place, only behaving differently, varying its deceits and its moods. Then one day, from the whited chart and from the water, the land stands up. It was there. It has not only its existence in dark outlines on a chart, it is a different land from that we left. It is the land to which we have been bound. There is no mistaking the landfall at the Cape, the rough outline of the Cape Peninsular, Table Mount, and Good Hope afar off, and near the table the Lion's Head, the Devil's Peak, the Apostles, and all those lesser hills, the whole forming a great cloud of massive and sterile rock, looking as if it had been flung there in exasperation by the gods, at the crossroads of the stormy oceans, with an oath and a wild shout to the sea. Here, see what you can do against this. And the sea from that day to this has not been able to do very much, not even to carve out a good harbor. But my reflections are cut short by the arrival of a boatload of immigration inspectors, with, as always, an insatiable demand for crew lists and the like, and the tidings that all the cadets and the crew are prohibited. That is to say, I bring them at my risk, and I must take them away again, or send them away if they leave, or suffer heavy fines. And up on deck there is another fellow in the wilderness without crying, "Where is the deratization certificate?" Deratization. I feel like telling him he can deratize himself, and if he can find a rat aboard my vessel, or the slightest evidence that one has ever been there, why, I'll eat all the forms his launch can carry out. And there are customs chaps and so forth sealing up the ship's stores. In such manner are wandering vessels now received at all civilized ports. But they are nice fellows, these inspectors at the Cape, and indeed, if I had not been on my feet 36 hours, I should have been quite glad to see them. We tie up in the dock beneath a coal gantry, where there is a pack of chandlers, runners, yelping to come on board. "I'll give you 1%, Captain," one clamors, and another raises him to 1.5 to 3. "Where are the price lists?" I asked, but they haven't anything so prosaic, and I gather between whiles that this percentage they are offering me is a kickback on the ship's bills for my own pocket, a sort of inducement to do business for my profit as master but not as owner. They did not know I was the owner. Graft indeed, but damn it all, I am the owner, and it seems to me a mighty strange inducement to offer that I should accept a commission from my own funds in order to connive at what pretty much amounts to felony against me. Queer world. The profit motive again, I suppose. I never could get this ship chandlery business properly puzzled out. The people at the Cape are kind, and I stayed a week, engaged for the most part in meeting the multifarious needs of the ship, a spar from which to shape, a new fore-top-gallant mast, and tools to work with, food of all kinds, from marmalade to baking powder, from salt pork to hops for making yeast, spare glasses for the skylights in case the high seas stove in some. They did. Marline, cup grease, ratline stuff, sail needles, caustic soda, herrings and tomato sauce, seaming twine, copper tacks, lamp chimneys, round iron, disinfectant, burlap, permanganate of potash, and the list is not yet begun. It is extraordinary how a ship can proceed at sea, living on her stores sufficient unto herself, in need of nothing, yet if she comes into any port her needs are endless. I found that South Africa is a poor place wherein to buy South African produce, the best being shipped abroad, and the inhabitants paying dearly for what is left. I had bought better African stuff in London at lower prices than I could get at Cape Town. However, so it is, I gathered that in many instances the producers collected subsidies for sending their stuff away, in order that the growers could sell their produce at a profit on the world markets. The citizens were penalized to provide the subsidies. At least so it seemed to me. Doubtless it was all in order, and had been conceived and established as a way of life by great economists. I am no economist. I merely thought it strange that people in a country where good food was grown taxed themselves to have it sent away, and then lived expensively upon what remained. I saw little of the Cape. It was the week of King George's Jubilee, and the city was bedecked with flags and filled with a strange multitude. There was a regatta at which the hardy oarsmen rowed in half a southeast gale that set up a nasty slop on the open water. There was to be, I heard, a whalers' or lifeboats' race for the British ships in port, but though there were some 5 or 6 big steamers in it, chanced that we alone had a white crew. It was not polite, maybe, to race the colored crews in that hybrid and color-sensitive place. So the yellow and the dark-visaged British mariners went about their work. We were invited to send a crew in a whalers' race against a crowd from some stationary local training ship and the Naval Reserve. I sent a crew with misgivings, as only one of them, a former Navy boy, had ever pulled in a whaler before. However, they had pulled a good deal in the open sea, and were in the best of condition. As it turned out, the bad weather suited them, and they won by some 17 lengths. The ship was presented with a silver cup, and everyone was pleased. The town clerk and some gentlemen came down the morning of the day. We sailed, and handed over the handsome cup with speech-making and with smiles, and we left the Cape well pleased. I had met some good friends there, in spite of hurry, and we were all very well received. I found a new cadet, a decent young fellow named Carmichael, paid my bills, there seems no alternative, cleared the ship, secured a Dutch bill of health for the East Indies, and departed. I swung the ship in Table Bay, and had a shore expert adjust the compass, which had been giving trouble. He was gone in an hour or so, and we slipped quietly out to sea, under all sail, past Sea Point, bound first to Empenon, or Bulalang, 6,500 miles away. The compass adjuster's charge was £5, but we had not got very far before I saw that his estimate of value of his genius was grossly exaggerated. I must add, however, in all fairness to him, that he had not left the compass much worse than he had found it. It blew freshly at southeast when we left, and continued to do so for some days. I stood to the southward on the port tack, planning to get across the Agulhas bank and out of the short sea and the adverse current as quickly as possible. In comparison with these preliminary aims, getting to eastward did not matter. That would be easy enough when the time came. So I stood down towards 40 south, and the wind was fluky and variable again. It was early winter then. Where were the gales? We wanted the strong west winds to drive us eastwards, almost to the Lewin before turning north towards the Indies. This was the only feasible way for the square-rigged ship to go. Had I tried to go direct, a course I could not even consider, I should have had the southeast trade a headwind and might have been a year. It was May 14th when we left Cape Town, but it was the 17th before we were round Good Hope. The wind, what there was of it, still hung in the east, and this seemed to bring the Agulhas current further south, so that, though we had made considerable latitude, we still had the drift against us. We made little over 500 miles the first week out, then it was calm. We rolled along very quietly again, watching our friends the albatrosses. There was one of these, a big royal with a queer reddish mark across one side of his face, that had followed us to the Cape from before Tristan. We called him Fred, and there was always a piece of pork for him. Now here he was again, and he stayed with us to the Lewin. We took rather a fancy to old Fred. He used to watch the stern light bracket all day, for this was where his pork was placed. Sometimes in the gales he was missing for a while, but he always came back again. We were 12 days at sea before we had the first westerly gale, but once the gale found us they stayed. Good gales. None was so strong we could not use it, and we ran and roared along with the spume flying. They always began in the same way, in the north with rain and falling glass and growing wind, and then they blew hard for a while at the northwest, perhaps increasing in that quarter to a hard gale that lasted 12 hours or 24 or even longer. And then, with a slight upward flick of the glass, the wind would jump at once to the southwest or south, blowing violently at first from there, then quickly settling down to a moderate gale and blowing the sky clear. That would pass, and we would wait for the next cyclonic movement to overtake us. They passed by at great speed, one behind the other, like expresses on the subway. Maybe they go like that right round the world, for there is no land down there to incommode them, not from Good Hope eastwards to the Horn, and while we ran our easting down, the same storm perhaps travelled round the world and caught us up again. Well, we could use them all. Storms of this character cause no alarm to well-found vessels, though sometimes they blow so hard that even a running ship must temporarily heave to. Strong winds, which follow a clearly defined course of conduct and stick to it, are not worrying. If a ship could run fast enough, of course, she could stay with the one storm and make it take her round the world. Some of the great clippers of the early Australian days, with their great length and their tremendous power, made magnificent runs almost exactly in this manner, though they would rarely carry the same movement for more than a week or 10 days, and that indeed was time enough to hurl them from Good Hope to the Bight. Even the grain racers of today have frequently run down this stormy stretch in 15 days, averaging 300 miles a day. It was mighty exhilarating sailing down there for all the gloominess of the north wind days, and the rain and sleet and the cold and the high seas. The sea runs so long that its height does not matter. The ship is so short she is always only in one sea and behaves beautifully. She is the ideal size for ocean voyaging, though she might be 10 feet longer with advantage to her speed. She has beam enough to carry the greater length, and it would increase her speed. It was difficult to get her over 10 knots, though sometimes she touched 12, but she did so much tobogganing, so much climbing up the sides of the great seas and rolling down their further inclines, with the height of water behind taking the wind from the lower sails, and she was hard to steer, would have been in any event, but with the adjusted compass. It was guesswork in the gales. I ran before whatever came, when it blew mightily, keeping the jib boom headed always somewhere east, and holding a good press of sail as long as possible. She was a small ship, amply canvassed, but I knew that the more we drove before these gales, the more quickly she would be gone from those wintry seas and reach again the milder latitudes of the trades. I had only 2 years or so for this circumnavigation, and half of the first year was gone with the ship not yet come anywhere. 2 years, I decided, is not long enough. So they came down gale after gale, and we ran 1,200 miles a week. It was cold and boisterous, and with rain and sleet, but how she ran! The 1st of June found the ship storming through the raging sea somewhere below 40 south, halfway between the Cape and Australia, with the strong wind roaring in the rigging and the topsails, reefed down, and Jan, the son of Captain Junker, laughing at the wheel in the rain. I asked him in a brief lull why he smiled so happily at the beauty of the little ship in the great sea, he said, and how bravely she ran, brave and buoyant and almost dry. This would confound the woebegons in Denmark, who had said she was afraid to go beyond the North Sea. Afraid, good Lord, and here she was 10,000 miles from Denmark, running down her easting in the winter's wild west winds. Jan's father had been master of the ship for 20 years, and he loved her, but he had never had her in a great ocean wind or a long, true sea. Now Jan could write and tell him how well she behaved, and the boy smiled at the thought of his father's pleasure. We raced on in the heavy wind with the sleet squalls marching one behind the other, overtaking us all day, roaring down upon us from the murk astern, drenching the already thrice-drenched sails, and passing on. The hail stings and the wind roars, and the gale grows steadily into a real storm tumult of wind and sea. The sea is very high, and the squalls are savage. At midday, the main topgallant that has been carried long over the single reefed main topsail must come in, and nightfall finds her reefed close down. She was beginning to stagger a bit with the weight of sail. That is no use. There is no sense in overdriving, which is merely a strain on ship gear and men. Now the squalls grow in number and in strength until the sea smokes in anger, and the spray is gathered up and hurled from every smallest ruffle on its tormented surface. The spray flies, and the foam streaks, and the great seas tower over us higher than the mainyard. Their crests fall viciously aboard more often than enough, but only their crests. She dodges the weight of water and always eludes the heaviest seas. It is as well she does. At night it is wild black and hailing, as the nights come down here with these yellow slender masts quickly engulfed in the blackening gloom. I feel a tenseness I have not known at sea before. It is the sudden shifts of wind at night that might be dangerous. Yet shall I heave to, or shorten down unnecessarily? No, no, run on, for the masts stand up strong and superb from the reeling decks, as if they had grown there and no man had made them. The strong pattern of the cordage in the yards is staunch as the boughs of giant trees. Let her go, and go it is. I had hoped to look in at St. Paul Island on our way. According to the South Indian Ocean pilot, it must be an interesting place. I stand towards the island as well as the swinging compass will allow me, and then when by dead reckoning we are within a few score miles, the wind comes down heavier than ever and the sea mounts and the visibility is impossible, and I run on now fallen off from the course, and hoping to God that we shan't see the island. It is full gale now, savage and determined. For the first time I look aloft with apprehension at the gear that has been assaulted and battered and blown upon so much, and see the wooden lower yards waving like willow wands in the great wind, and the foreyard working with the strain of the topsail sheets like a huge yew bow. The sea is a tortured murk of fiendish water smoking and snarling round us. Now the foamy wake rears high above the stern, as if we were suspended from it, only in a moment to fall far below, as if it were a writhing cable we were dragging through the sea. Now the long jib boom points downwards towards the bowels of the earth, and holding to a backstay by the helmsman aft, I catch my breath a second, wondering whether any ship ever dived so deep that she made no recovery. We don't know if any has. No one has told about it. Some fine ships have gone missing along this road. I watch the sea foam in its ceaseless anger, and feel the driven spume sting my face. Day long and night long I stand upon the grating now, for there is nowhere to walk until my southwester chafes the skin from my forehead, and my beard grows grey by God, and the sea boots on my feet are heavy as a diver's. Day long I watch the sea and the ship, and night long stand looking, not seeing much, but ready for shift of wind, or the sudden swing of indifferent helmsmanship, ready for the sea, and I hope for any emergency that may come. We are down now to the close reefed fore and main topsails, with the mizzen all fast, and a rag or two of the best storm sails. The gale increases and increases. So the greyness of the morning comes, for which I thank the Lord, and still the wind increases. Shall I bring her up now, heave to? If I do not now, very soon I shall not be able to. I have almost decided to lie to a little before noon, when the glass gives a half-millimeter jump, and the wind jumps with it to the south-southwest. Now the angry and tormented sea is so tossed and torn in all directions that there can be no safety in heaving to. We must run. She staggers, lurches, and rolls the sea on board, while her 3 gold trucks heave agonized, protesting circles towards the grey sky. But she cannot help it. This cross and insane sea would break upon a whale, and in this the albatross is hove to. She avoids the worst weight of the water quickly now. The strong sou'wester flattens down the sea with driving rain that is soon gone. The sky clears, and the great sea in a few hours rolls at us and by again in steady, tremendous furrows. From the southwest, true now, and she knows what to do in it. Bravely she picks up her stride, and still runs with the foam boiling and the washports clanging, and the sea gushing from every scupper hole, and the spray driving over the topgallant yards. We run on. Day long I watch again, and in the night not seeing much, but ready, and I watch while the storm blows. The gear holds, thank God, she yields nothing. There are no accidents, nothing carried away, nobody overboard, nobody hurt. These are the great things to be thankful for. There had been much work aloft and on the deck. A little ship, a moment's forgetfulness, and someone might have gone. All hands have worked splendidly, and they always did in any real storm or stern emergency. The boys and the grain ship men, those great citizens of the sea. Wet through cold, hail lashed in the storm, they climbed out upon the yards with cheerfulness and zest through day and night, and always quickly did what was ordered, quickly and well. Aye, great fellows all, and in the following morning, with the gale survived, there comes aft a deputation from the port watch to growl about the food. Aye, great chaps, real human beings. The pea soup was burned and rather watery too, if the truth be told, but the cook had done splendidly to have anything warm at all. There would have been no growl if the galley had been washed out and they had been given nothing. It blew up again more than once along that stormy road, but the little ship ran bravely and suffered no harm. We did not carry away a rope yarn between Cape Town and the Strait of Bali, and no one had even a boil. I began gradually to incline the ship's head towards the northwards, and there was some pale sun. We were come almost to the longitude of Cape Lewin. I turned due north, then making slow progress at first in a high head sea with a light wind, in which the ship bucked and floundered. She did not take kindly to a steep, short sea and little wind, and hoppy-horsed about miserably that whole long day, throwing the food from the mess-room table and tossing the boys out of their bunks. But the mood passed, as all the sea's moods always do. The sea took off, and there came fair wind, so I stood to the north, somewhere off the west coast of Australia, with the land just out of sight, and by 30 degrees south the weather was fine. The royal yards were crossed again, and the sun shone. We had broken no records and made no famous runs, but we had sailed over 5,000 miles in a month and were feeling pleased. I began to read in the pilots about Ampenon and Bololong. We never did get to Ampenon, which is the undistinguished port of Lombok Island. We were unable to make Lombok Straits, and for a while it looked as if we could not make Bali Strait either. The southeast trade was more east than southeast, and the monsoon was east by north. It was fresh and brought with it a drift of 20 to 30 miles dead to the westward. It was this factor which interfered with our course. I pointed up as well as I could, though not too high, keeping the yards a little off the backstays to get better headway out of her. Our head was towards Sumbawa, but the drift set the ship steadily to the west. I had hoped to get through to the Java Sea either by the Strait of Alas or Lombok Strait. Bali Strait I definitely ruled out as being a good place for strong powered vessels, but just an unnecessary risk to me. The southeast monsoon, if it ever did blow from southeast, was of course fair wind through there, but the place was a 30-mile funnel, a narrow gorge between the Javanese and the Bolognese hills, a reef-fringed canyon through which the monsoon was apt to whistle at the force of half a gale, and the tides ran at 6 knots with rips and whirlpools and eddies. It was well lit, but that would not help us if we got in a tide rip or whirlpool and were thrown at 6 knots against a reef. No, Bali Strait was out. I was very glad to go through there afterwards. That is the way a voyage in sail turns out. You cannot very well plan ahead or arrange your route. You have to make up your mind to which place you are going and get there somehow. Lombok I could give up, since I had to, but I wanted to go to Bali. The wind, which had been fresh enough to blow the Australian sand on our decks, though we were 60 miles from the land a week earlier, was now light, and the set to the west was as strong as ever. In the end we made our landfall at Balambangan Peninsular, the southeastern end of Java, and could barely see the Tafahuk of Bali in the haze. I had to jam her up and beat to clear Tanjong Bantanan, but once we had managed that, at least we had Bali Strait clear before us. The strait is 28 miles wide at its southern end, and there are no dangers there. It is easy enough to begin its navigation, but the northern end is only 1 mile wide, and on both sides great mountains rise, so huge that now they were hidden in the haze and nothing could be seen. But it is not the narrowness that matters. It is the funneling of the tides. There is no part even of the open sea that is entirely foolproof, but the difficulties of navigation are always intensified when there is land. A narrow strait such as this, lined with reefs and full of rips and eddies, is as nasty a piece of sailing as a full-rigged ship can face. It had, however, a few points in its favor in that, before coming to the Narrows, there was anchorage here and there, where a ship might await favorable tide, and it certainly was well lit. Sailing ships should navigate this strait only by day, says the pilot very properly, and I noted the advice. I had not the slightest intention of flying in its face. Once we were past Balambangan, we were out of the set and were able to head a better course. I steered towards the middle of Bali Strait, meaning to keep as far from the land as I could. The wind at last was true from southeast, and though it was hazy, the conditions were excellent, but we could not see much of the land, and we saw little or no sign of habitation. This was the first of the Isles of Adventure, so to speak, of our voyage, and all we saw the first morning was a giant airliner flying the mails from England to Australia high up in the sky. According to that somewhat antiquated authority, the East Indies pilot, 1 million people live on Bali, which is a small place, and 35 million on Java. But we did not see so much as a newborn babe out fishing. The land on both sides of the strait appeared arid and not much cultivated. Later we saw a native prau, about 28 feet long, carrying a cargo of hogs, made up in cane baskets, and 17 people. They bobbed up from all directions as we passed and grinned a welcome. Our prospects of heeding the pilot's advice and passing the Narrows by day steadily diminished. Throughout the afternoon we were held almost in the same place by a strong south-going stream, and though the wind was a fine wholesale breeze in our favor, we made almost no progress. The early evening found us off Banjowangi. What should I do? Anchor and await the daylight, or use the flood and get through by night? The ebb had been running so long and so strongly to the south that I thought the flood, sometimes missing at that time of year to add to the difficulties, was about due. Why waste it? The place was well lit. I had only to get on the Tanjong Bonserong range lights and stay on them. The flood, if it did come, would soon rush me through, or I might find myself with the ship suddenly flung by some tide rip across the wind, aback and uncontrollable, setting rapidly upon a reef. This is the danger in such places, and with the Java shore only a mile from the Balinese, there would be a little chance if this kind of thing did happen. But if one is always to be overawed by the circumstances which may rise against one, why, full-rigged ships would never have been built. I stood on, carefully and slowly whether I wished it so or not. But if I ever tried to pilot with great care, it was that night. From Banjowangi to the Narrows is about 8 miles. It has cleared, and the great peaks of Java and of Bali both tower over us. The wind is freshening, and as we slowly approach the entrance to the Narrows, but it is a clear and peaceful night, with the Black Sea flat, though I hear it clearly breaking on the reefs of both sides. We have the range lights in line, fixed white and flashing red. We begin to gather speed. It must be the brief slack water. Soon we shall rush. The wind is strong and strengthening every moment. Without the aid of the tide, we are running in that flat sea a good 10 knots. Now comes the tide, the rush begins. With a greater speed than we have ever made before, we rush on towards the canyon of the Narrows, and the helmsman, it is Hilgard, needs his nerve and all his skill to keep that fixed white and flashing red in line. Sometimes she yaws, quick with the helm there. He is quick, she responded. She is a good steering ship. Onward she runs. We are in the Narrows now, port a little. Steady, steady as she goes. Starboard, I con from the foresail, head on the Bansering range, for the visibility is poor from the wheel. The lights are in line, now they swing. We run through a breaking burst of whitecaps of some rip, but she holds the way. The crickets are chirping in the Java forest. The noise of the sea swirling on the Bali reefs rises and rises. We run on. She handles well. The foam boils at the old prow. The wake races phosphorescent stern. Now Tanjong, Passier's light, and Duvin's break clear. We run towards Passer. We sheer towards Java. God, watch the helm. I hear a monkey chatter in a Balinese tree. But the Lord is kind. We make it. We came through in about 15 minutes. The conditions were ideal, and the strait is well lit. I bore off to the eastward, round Bali's northern shore, and I looked back over the decks of the little ship, at the black sails and all the old, tired grace of her, gently heeling to the breeze now as she ran through the night in the Java Sea. For the first time in her half-century of existence, I looked back over her a long time, and I felt rather fond of the little vessel. Before midday we were anchored off Beau le Long, close up on the reef near the light structure. We had been 49 days from Table Bay, and had sailed 6,500 miles.